Welcome to That Conversation by Fire Kochi. Today we're going to chat with Mr. Maheshwar Perry, former president and publisher of the Outlook Group and founder of Careers 360 magazine. He shares with us his vision on the fallout of the COVID-19 crisis, the importance of an independent media, and what career paths young people can look forward to in the next decade. To begin with, we are in the middle of the lockdown right now. What is your take on the centre's handling of the coronavirus crisis?
I think much of the action has been it could have been a lot more worked upon and planned better than the way it's panned out. Because I think when you're talking of locking down the country, you need to confide in a set of people. Those set of people must come back with their plan of action of what suffers, what doesn't suffer, who suffers, who doesn't suffer, what is damaged, what is not damaged. That process was missing because it had to be that we want to announce it overnight and it's 4 hours and all. I understand that you want to do a 4-hour thing, please go ahead with doing that. But you actually had a space where you announced that you will talk, then you actually did a Janata curfew, then after 2 days you again came and talked, and then you did that, right? In that interim period, you could have shared it with a set of states or a few people at least, so that the basic issues that actually we see today, which hurt us, pain us, and so many countrymen are going through this pain, a part of it could have been avoided. I'm absolutely, when such a lockdown happens, not everyone would be happy and some would suffer, but the pain and suffering could have been dramatically reduced if there was a proper sharing of information and a federal structure that took over. Somewhere along the line, I do think that the centralization of power is the cause, because these problems are sorted at a state level, at a village level, at a taluka level. They're not sorted by the central level, right? But the pain and trouble is actually happening at a very, very local level. And it is local people who are the first point of contact in these kind of matters. No one flies down from a helicopter and starts solving your problem when you're, drowning in a sea. It is at the local level. So from that perspective, I think, we did not trust our own people, our own bureaucracy, our own, federal structure, our own chief ministers. And to that extent, I think it's been a pretty damaging exercise.
One thing you have been unapologetically critical about is how the centre handled the migrant crisis. What do you think the centre and state governments could have done to better the plight of migrant workers?
So again, the same thing, Sumi, whenever we plan any such action which has to do with the country, you start first dealing with the most, people who are not empowered at all. You need to start from the lowest strata of the society, because they will be the first person to lose out, right? Then move up and move up and move up, right? We don't start from Delhi when we deal with politics, and from Bombay when we start with business. Because businesses don't thrive, business doesn't mean Bombay, neither does people mean Delhi, right? And it happened with demonetization also, if you go back, right? We forget that most of our people are those hands which work very tirelessly, very silently, but are never seen. And that is a mass of people. For me, any planning of this nature will have to start off talking of what happens to daily wage earner. What happens to that worker who sets up a small cart where he sells vegetables, or it can be golgappa, or whatever it is. Unless you start thinking of that when you make your plan, because look at India as a total, you have about 495 million workers, of which just and you remove the farming sector, which has about 235 million people. Of the 265 million, 200 million people are unorganized workers. Whereas when you don't talk of the big companies and how they'll take care of their employees. You actually have to talk of the 200 million people who are earning by themselves, and if you don't think of them, you as a country have to take care of them, right? So unless you start dealing with thinking of them, and you make any plan of this nature, of this magnitude, we as a country are bound to fail. The country itself, forget about you, me, those people, the country goes down, because if those people go down, the country goes down. So from that perspective, that's the first part I would do. And two, you should have warned the states of what is about to happen. When that happens, the state should have made an interim plan of, it can be, overnight shelters, or how you'll they will communicate that everything would be normal over a period of time. And whenever there's a problem, run more trains and let people go slowly but steadily. They could have been much, much better planned. And again, I'm saying that this top-down approach of decision making on this kind of a nature of a lockdown, or where the entire country is locked down, is for me a non-starter.
Moving back into a little bit of history, you took on the IIPM at a time when almost all of print media was literally fawning over the institute, thanks to its hefty ad spends. What spurred you to keep going?
Interesting question. I think it is not that I was an activist who was out to kill the Goliath. That was not the case. I was doing my job. Like today, Sumi, you are a journalist. You do an interview, you do a proper interview, and you write about it. Someone comes back and says that, listen, this part of my being was not properly presented, and he files a case against you. What do you do? If you've done your work truthfully, then you defend yourself, right? Which is what I did. I'm pretty clear that I was never trying to be an activist. But having said that, when I got into the story, I was very clear that there will be legal repercussions because the story was such. And I was prepared for the legal repercussions, so much so that I started ensuring that the documents were very clear. I didn't utter anything which is English but other than fact. So if you read the story very well, there is not a single opinion that we made. All we did was to ensure that the facts were presented, because the facts are easily defendable as compared to an opinion. If I were to say, this is cheating, or if I have an opinion saying this is crude or something, then it is open for interpretation. But a fact is not open for interpretation. When I say that his placement is 0% and not 100%, it is not open for any interpretation unless the fact itself is wrong. So, for me, this was a story that had to be done. The entire objective, being and presence and of Careers 360 is meant to ensure that the student lives are protected. The students are ring-fenced because they are more vulnerable than the other side, right? In India, many people get taken away by the advertising and the hoopla around the advertising. So I felt that it was my bounden duty to do the story. I knew that I will get into legal, challenge, and it did happen. So there is nothing that I did to fight him, but there is nothing that was unexpected out of what happened after that.
So in the case of IIPM, what you essentially did is to stick to the core tenets of journalism.
I stuck to, that's what it is. I think, which is what it is. Sumit, the sad state of our country is today, let's assume that you're walking on the streets and you see an old woman being beaten up. Right? If you stop by and try to save that woman, you're a hero. Now, it is supposed to be normal behavior, isn't it? So, I think we're living in an age and time when being normal and truthful to yourself has become the abnormal. And we need to all work towards a day and age when what is supposed to be normal is abnormal, which means that we need to make that the current day abnormal to be normal. That people tell the truth, people stand up for what is right, people stand up for what is fair, people only take the side of the just, that is supposed to be normal. Today it's abnormal because of the times that we live in. So, and I think hopefully this generation will work towards that. It's pretty important,
Speaking of media, do you think media is increasingly becoming a voice of the government rather than remaining a critical, independent fourth pillar of democracy?
Media is no longer independent, so forget about that. We have to take the power back into our hands. Media is not important. Over the last few years, it's been systematically and by a plan and a strategy been decimated. And you don't have a independent media now. So if you're thinking of third pillar, fourth pillar, fifth pillar, forget about that. We are the only pillars left.
When you say that media is no longer independent, do you feel that the entry of corporate houses into media has something to do with this loss of independence?
It is not with corporate houses. It's about the integrity of each of us, right? There are corporate houses which are very, very good. There are corporate houses that are very, very bad. I don't think we should interpret it in terms of a sweeping generalization of what happened and what doesn't happen. Even within media, there are those small, set of people who are fighting hard to stand tall. So there are. So again, it may be a sweeping statement when I say media is no longer independent. But having said that, media is not independent by and large. The largest, media houses are no longer independent. They take a biased view of many things. They only project a certain kind of a thing. You can actually buy into the media at any point in time, and it's pretty easy. So, and it has nothing to do with corporate culture. Some of these media houses are only owned by media people, right? But they still are biased. They don't have any other business other than just being in media. So, I don't look at it that way. It is just that the integrity of people is missing, or they've given up, or they've given in. They've submitted themselves. They have become more pliant than ever, and they're more happy towing the line of what the government wants them to do, so that they survive and prosper.
Why do you think that every argument about governance, or rather the lack of governance, changes track and focus and becomes more about religion, region, and eventually Pakistan blaming?
Pretty simple, because again, earlier I talked about what can be interpreted and what cannot be interpreted. Facts cannot be, interpreted. Facts are facts. So today, if you talk of whether the government of India has done a fantastic job of post-lockdown, the facts stare at them, right? But when you talk of religion, it is a question of interpretation. Then you get into history. So you're no longer dealing with the current event, which is post the 23rd or 24th of March. We no longer are confining ourselves to, the last 2 months. The moment you talk of religion, we can talk of 300 years. If 300 years doesn't suit you, you go back to 3,000 years. So it's easy getting into a tangent, and every conversation on religion is meant to divert from what exactly is supposed to be discussed at this point. Because if you look at the migrant workers issue, are they not Hindus? Have they not suffered? We as a country are fighting to get 30,000 people, from outside, beyond our country, and ensure that they have a safe home. What have we done to the 30 million people who are walking on the streets in this country? We burned the entire country for to ensure that 30,000 people who we believe are not having a happy life outside of this country, and we passed a bill and the entire country was up in flames. What have we done for this one? And that is what it means.
As someone who focuses a lot on youth and education, what is your outlook for young people today?
Hopeful but fearful. Hopeful because I know that they take a stand and they have a voice and so on and so forth. Fearful because they might be misled, misguided with the kind of slate of information that is wrong, not too factual, digressing them, diverting them, making them fight on issues that are not relevant. So I think very hopeful because they take a stand, but very fearful of which way they may go.
What career paths do you think look ideal for the coming decade?
Oh, that's a pretty large question for me. I wish I can answer. The simple thing I'll put together is that, listen, post-corona, the world would see more investments in certain kinds of sectors and lesser investments in certain kinds of sectors. Health would be a big thing. So if you're getting into any health sciences program within engineering or within medical sciences, it will have a huge prospect. Anything which is ancillary, incidental, or adjacent to health sciences. So for example, you can take biotech engineering, or you can take, how do I put it, nanotechnology and any of those things which are also engineering branches, or electrical engineering because it has some component to do with health sciences also, because you can create equipment, build equipment and so on. So anything that you actually have on health sciences side, anything that you will have on taking education, financial inclusion and all those things through technology will have a lot of scope moving forward. Data sciences, blockchain, artificial intelligence, gaming, virtual reality, Internet of Things. So all these things will have a huge play moving forward. And some of the other things that you have currently, which, for example, I'm very fearful of what happens to people who are graduating as with travel and tourism diploma or so degrees. What do they do at this point? What do people do when you're graduating with an event management degree or retail management degree? I'm hoping that it will last very short, but one should start exploring adjacency of profession. So if you're into hospitality, you must see if there is a space for you to also add a skill which is customer service management, because it's an adjacent skill set in that sense, right? But there are a few industries that will struggle and suffer. And post this pandemic, there is one thing that for me which is very clear, that some people will bleed to death, some people will bleed, and some people will have bruises. There is no one who will come out clean out of this, right? So you need to be ensuring that you come out with bruises and nothing more, because in my opinion, there'll be a few industries that will not exist 3-4 years down the line, and that is a worrying thing.
So in this scenario, what would your advice be to young people who are choosing careers or looking at education options at this point?
So be flexible. Don't say that I want to be working in a hotel, for example. If you don't get a job in hotel, add one skill, or even without the skill, with the current skills itself might be relevant enough or good enough. Get onto an adjacent career path, because these are not the times for you to say that I will only exercise my choice. So flexibility is very, very important, and resilience. A lot of us were not placed on the campus, but we still sit here. This fad of campus placement has started in the last 10-15 years, and hopefully will go away in the next 10-15 years. You need to find your own job. You need to create a skill for yourself, stand in the queues, and get your own job, and start learning that, which means that you need to be flexible and you need to be resilient.
With that, I think we have come to the end of our session. This has really been an enlightening chat. Thank you so much for having been a part of that conversation by Via Kochi.